Live your life, boy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Conspiracy Farm, where we don't start the conspiracies, we just add the water. And now, your host of the most state-of-the-art, most informed podcast on the interweb, I present to you Pat Miletich and Jeffrey Wilson. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for war?
Yeah, rear naked choke of Cocker Spaniel, bro. You know what I'm saying?
Bro.
Change the neighborhood up.
Conspiracy Farm. Go. Check it out.
We are off to the races, ladies and gentlemen. Another one for the archives as we live in these crazy times. Wow, global pandemic, economic shutdown, global collapse. Is that what's happening right now in front of us? I am so very stoked to have this man on. Similar to all of our guests we've tried to have on, they're very well researched and they're like assassins with their knowledge. Champ, how are you doing today? UFC Hall of Famer joining me as always.
Is that me?
No, he froze up, I guess it looks like. Patrick,
yeah, I think.
Well, author, researcher, Oxford scholar Joseph P. Farrell is taking a little bit of time out of his busy schedule. He's an author of a great many books. You can check him out at GizaDeathStar.com, as well as a very, very informative and extensive YouTube channel, which is Giza Death Star as well. Is that correct, sir?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Joseph P. Farrell is joining us today. How are we doing, my friend?
Pretty good. How are you doing, Jeffrey?
Well, you know, like I said, it's a rather unique time to be alive, I have to say. Trying to make sense of it. You know, I as a history guy, you've seen kind of these kind of, not necessarily exactly like this, but kind of civilizations and collapses come and go, and you always read about them in history books, and sometimes we romanticize them. But to be living through something like this is just amazing. You know what I mean? That's never happened before. What are your thoughts?
Well, I have to be honest. I'm of two minds of this, and most of it's media hype. And when I say that, I don't mean to belittle anybody who's suffered through it. You know, there have been some really bad cases of this thing. So I'm not trying to belittle that.
Sure.
But I saw a statistic today that so far there have been about 14,000 some and a few odd deaths from this thing out of a world population of 7 billion. So run the percentages, and it's several decimal places. Of,
well, so I guess
a fraction.
Yeah,
a fraction of 1%. So pandemic, you know, this thing is not. So we have to ask ourselves, well, what then is this really about?
Yeah. So my question of, like I've asked all of our guests, do you see our reaction matching the threat? And it sounds like your answer is a negative.
Well, the reaction seems to me to be overblown. I mean, this business of shutting everything down to get control of it, I suspect that that's part of the agenda. But to be honest with you, I suspect that there are several others.
Right.
And at the top of my list, I just did an interview with Catherine Austin Fitz about 3 hours.
I was going to ask you about that because I heard it already. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, we basically came to the conclusion that target number one of this thing was China. And for the reason of largely the Silk Road and China's growing aggressive on the world stage. And the problem is, if you go to Asia, basically nobody trusts the Chinese government. And you can't blame them. You know, this is an unreconstructed communist government. But the Silk Road project has been kind of the emerging geopolitical theme of the last decade. And the way I view it, to a certain extent, Jeffrey, is that this thing is going to, I think, set China's Silk Road project back at least a decade. And another consequence geopolitically, and we've seen this already happen, is Vladimir Putin shut down Russia's borders very early on. He was almost the first out of the gate. He was out of the gate with that before President Trump. And the way we look at it is that part of this perhaps was to force Russia to choose between China or the West. And it's very interesting that just within the last couple days, we've seen Mr. Putin authorize eight, mind you, medical mobile brigades to send aid to Italy. 8 brigades, you know, that's 4 divisions of medical equipment and so on. Yeah, that's a lot. So, you know, it looks to me like they may have chosen Europe. But the other part of this is, if China's the target of this operation, which it appears to me that it is, then Russia's going to have to go ahead with their version of the Silk Road, which they were doing anyway, and this is going to drive Russia into, right into the hands of Japan.
And just for people who don't know, it's, we've talked about this extensively on the show, the one belt, one road policy. It's not just necessarily a road. It's a physical road, it's a rail system, it is a maritime route which stretches all around the Yellow Sea, where they're building the bases all the way around to Sri Lanka and into Africa. And, there was a whole history of Sri Lanka and the bases there, whatever. But yeah, this is big time stuff. This is what Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote about the grand chessboard and trying to keep anybody rising in Eurasia, not just Europe or Asia, but the whole area of Eurasia. They're trying to keep any growth of any superpower down. And like you said, China's on the move.
Yes, right. And this is definitely going to set them back. So that was target number one. And the way we look at it too, there's any number of proposals out there. There's three basic theories, as far as I can tell on the internet, that this was, number one, either a Chinese operation. I don't think that's the case, although I do think Xi has responded in such a way that really cost his government a lot of moral capital in the rest of the world. And he also used it as kind of a crisis of opportunity, as far as I can tell, to get rid of some internal political opposition. The second way to view it was that this is somehow an operation of what I like to call Mr. Globaloney, targeting China to get, targeting China. But also, I think there was a certain anti-Trump aspect to this thing. But the problem there is, it's looking to me like you're dealing with another kind of 9/11 case of a penetrated operation here, because his response is, on the one hand, over the top, but at the same time, like Xi, he seems to be using this as kind of a crisis of opportunity. There's been a very strange sucking of the air out of all these other stories. I mean, all of the stuff we were going through in the last 3 years, this is suddenly cleared off the table. All the discussion that we've heard from different states about secession, California, Virginia, Oregon, this is cleared off the table.
All gone.
And it's all gone. Yeah, it's all gone. And now we're hearing all of this business about bailouts and so on. So objective number two, it looks to me, and it kind of appears this way to Catherine Fitz as well, that we're dealing with something to distract people for a financial reset.
Yeah,
that's the term we hear a lot. The reset. Yeah. And we're going to get into it, but I think it's going to be political. It's going to be economic. It's going to be social. Right. But yeah, continue, sir.
Yeah. Well, the reset part of it, you're probably familiar with the story that just today, the New York Stock Exchange suspended last week all human trading on the floor and began complete electronic trading today. And to me, you couple this with the rise of high frequency trading, the dark pools and so on that we've seen rise in the last 20 to 30 years in the commodities and equities and securities markets. This means that they're able, literally within nanoseconds, to execute massive amounts of trade and shift the ownership of whole sectors of necessary equities and industries. So, who knows what's going to end up at the end of the trading day today, but they're able to do it like that.
Right.
And then leave all the rest of us kind of catching up to see what was done. So I think this is problem number two with this whole operation, is they're using this as a distraction to get other things done.
Well, and as we see these elements, like I said, social, politically, economic, for me, and I'm not near as smart, I'm not an economist, but even your lay person is seeing through.
I'm not either.
Well, you've done a lot more research on this, but it seems to me every element, every recipe or ingredient for economic and social collapse is here. They're flooding the economy with trillions of dollars. People are out of work. They're going to say they're going to give you $1,000, but that's not going to be worth anything, and places are going to be closed anyway. We're going to have social unrest, which is going to necessitate more lockdown. It just seems like every base is covered for a potential for just really, really bad stuff. From an economic standpoint alone, this could do this, but it seems like there's just every level of is there. I mean, what are your thoughts on the? I mean, even just the economy, the economic part of it, the almost global collapse. The economy was already. The global economy was already in the toilet. They start pumping all this money in. What about hyperinflation here in the United States?
Well, I think the real problem is, and Catherine and I discussed this, the real problem is they're going to get themselves into a simultaneous inflationary, deflationary spiral, because the other problem is we've seen this rush on the dollar, a problem of dollar liquidity. And that bodes very ill. And the other thing about this reset is I think there's something else going on economically that we have to pay attention to. And this is for want of a better expression, this is the underground economy. Shortly after this whole self-quarantine meme got started in this country, there were massive amounts, hundreds of arrests of cartel people in this country. Right. So it looks to me like Trump is taking this as a crisis of opportunity to roll up some of those networks. And, the signal that this was coming was his executive order of a couple of years ago, where he promulgated that order that anybody involved in human trafficking can have their assets seized. And I think we're just looking at the cusp of this. And the other interesting thing, pardon me?
I sure hope so.
Well, I do too. This has happened already, and there have been some more arrests. But again, the interesting thing here, Pat, is that we're watching this story suck the air out of all of the other stories. Right. So it's very difficult, to track all of this. Right. But I do think that's in the cards. We've been hearing now that the Department of Justice wants to suspend habeas corpus and also to extend the statute of limitations.
But I was going to ask you about that. Didn't they already have that with the declaration of emergency from 9/11 and the NDAA and all of that? Why do they need? Yeah. They were already able to disappear people. Why are they asking to do it?
Jay, it's not a military, right? It's the separation between the two.
Right. This declaration gives him some sweeping powers if he wants to use them. But I suspect again that this is the signal that this may have been an op designed to delay somehow all of those sealed indictments that we've been hearing about for the past couple of years. I think the number is now over 50,000. It's some astronomical number that's out there. And if those things were ready to be rolled out or unsealed, this is the perfect way to table all of that. So I suspect that this operation has several facets, and a little bit of it's some infighting going on, with Mr. Globaloney and the Trump administration and like-minded politics in Europe and so on. So there's a lot to this thing, we're reading tea leaves, gentlemen.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, you look at how this was kind of planned. The CDC in 2017 expanding their power for quarantining. You got the Event 201 with Bill Gates in New York in October of 2019. So this has been on their map.
Well, this has been on their map, and I find it highly unusual that after this thing gets started, Bill Gates all of a sudden resigns his position. Yeah, his positions in Microsoft and Berkshire Hathaway.
Right.
This is Warren Buffett's outfit. And again, it's very strange that Buffett always seems to show up in these stage plays. He was there at Offutt Air Force Base along with Brett Scowcroft and a bunch of other people during 9/11, So this guy, there's something going on here. So I'm looking at this whole thing, and what this is about is not about the coronavirus. I'm
Thank you.
Well, and even I'm sorry. Go ahead.
PhD, to have an Oxford PhD say that, right. I was at the grocery store, and there's people working at the grocery store that were talking to me, going, "Hey, man, this is what I think it is," and they were saying the same thing. It's sweeping across the country that people are finally figuring this out, going, "Wait a minute, man. Here's the deal. This thing has been around for months. I don't care what anybody says. It's been around in the United States for months. People have been getting it, and it's so far globally killed 15,000 people. after months of it happening, October probably, or maybe even before. So 15,000 deaths when the flu kills 500,000 people a year, but yet they're making us stay home and shutting down the global economy. This is not about a pandemic at all. This is absolutely about global collapse and reset. And now I want to get your ideas on this, Dr. Farrell. I have said since Trump got elected, pre-Trump, when he started to run, he would hint every great once in a while that he wanted to kill the Federal Reserve. He's hinted a couple more times, sporadically. And I still think that that's the only thing as a president, if he's actually a white hat and who he says he is the only thing he can do to literally save this country and save the citizens.
Well, let me give you three thoughts here, Pat. Number one, a week ago, I grocery shop about every 2 weeks because grocery shopping is my least favorite thing in the entire world to do. So I decided to go out and do my 2 weeks worth of grocery shopping. And I thought, well, this is all hype and it's not going to be that crazy. So I go to the grocery store and it's like fighting the Battle of the Somme all over again. And, and I was the British, I was the guy having to go over the top and charge the German trenches. But anyway, I'm standing in line for an hour and I'm listening to people talk. And my experience was exactly the same as yours. These people in the lines were not responding to the hysteria being generated by the media. They were responding out of cynicism to the government and to various institutions. That's the basis of their response, and it kind of blew me away. The second thing that I think we have to look at here is Trump. I had to hold my nose and vote for the man. I couldn't vote for the opposition party's candidate.
Right.
But Trump said something very interesting just this week that ties in with your Federal Reserve idea, possibly. And that is, if the government's going to bail out, these companies like Boeing and so on and so forth, Trump made it clear he wants an equity stake for the government in those companies with no buyback option. And he specified that. So in other words, if we go in and buy a stake in Boeing in return for bailout money, I suspect his real target there is the Federal Reserve. Because if we're going to have the taxpayers giving all of this money and the Federal Reserve is going to buy it out, I think what he just signals is we want an equity stake in the Federal Reserve, which basically would nationalize the bank and make it, a front for the U.S. Treasury. So that may be in the cards. I don't know. I have
That's
no
fascinating.
idea.
That's fascinating. Well, and as we know, these guys, as we kind of are just reacting right now, moment to moment, a lot of people just taking care of basic necessities, whatever you want to call them, these people, the architects of our society, they're thinking 10, 20, 30 years ahead. And I heard Catherine Austin Fitts mention, the climate change thing's kind of getting played out. So now they need something else to facilitate this reset. And when I say this reset, it's not just about the changing economy, but moving, the Internet of Things, these smart grids, the technocracy that we talk about, which is a reset that is beyond our understanding, moving from a energy-based economy to a resource-based economy. It's very similar to China. What are your thoughts on that?
From resource to energy?
A resource-based economy to energy. I apologize. Thanks, Pat.
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. And what makes me think that, again, is that President Trump has also, he's a very interesting man. He loves to send signals. And he's very masterful at the way he does this. He tosses out something, and the media, like a bunch of puppies, goes and chases the ball while he does something else over here that he wants to get done. So, but he's been very masterful in the sense of sending little signals and messages. And one of the things that he's said on various occasions repeatedly is that we have technology you wouldn't believe, and just wait till you see it. So in other words, there's the possibility that all of this is, being used to clear the noise out of the news cycle and get people's attention focused, so that if if and when they decide to come out with some big announcement regarding currency or new technologies or whatever, people's attention will be focused. Pardon me?
Or massive arrests.
Or massive arrests, yeah. And again, this is another part of the story that is not, as far as I can tell, capturing any of the lamestream corporate-controlled media's attention, is that these arrests are still going on. So, you know, something does appear to be up. And, you know, there's another factor to consider here, is that the most outbreaks that we've seen appear to be statistically concentrated in areas of the country that are definitely in the blue column. And, you know, this again to me is very, very suspicious that this thing is orchestrated somehow.
And it is very interesting. It is very interesting also that, and this is no lie, you go check it for yourself. It is actual, I looked at both maps. The supposed indictment map, where the most indictments are in those states, when you lay it over the top of the most coronavirus cases, it literally matches. And look, it could be coincidence. But I went, whoa, this is pretty bizarre.
Yeah, it is. It's very
something
bizarre.
Something else that I noticed today, which this was a little alarming to me, was Governor Cuomo was talking today, doing a press conference, and he would nonchalantly said, yeah, it's, you know, it's unfortunate. I'm sure my daughter's not feeling real good about this, but she's stuck with me for months now. And I went, wait a minute, months?
Yeah.
That's not something I wanted to hear.
Well, I mean, even if this is some kind of, like, you know, purge of the bad guys, man, why are they throwing the baby out with the bathwater? This is hurting a lot of people. But like you said, Doctor, there's a lot of layers to this, and that's what we've said. There's a lot of spokes on this wheel. So, but it's just unfortunate that, you know, the kind of whatever, it just is going to hurt a lot of people if this is.
War has collateral damage, if that's the case.
I guess so.
Well,
I guess so.
As an objective, you know, if we look at this as op, again, I think it is. You know, it depends on whose op it is. But, you know, I'm still putting most of my money that Mr. Globaloney cooked this up.
Is that you creeping out on your twig of high octane speculation like you do?
I'm creeping out on the end of the twig of high octane speculation. But I do that by nature, but anyway, I do suspect that it had as one of its goals to squeeze the middle class yet again.
Yes.
Which it's certainly doing. And it's not just in this country, Canada, Germany, France, Italy, you know, everywhere where you have a functioning middle class, it's squeezing them the worst. Yeah. And, you know, if you're not lucky enough to be someone like me that works from home, this really isn't a change in my lifestyle, but it certainly is affecting those, you know, teachers, doctors, lawyers, you know, the whole gamut, mechanics,
bartenders right here,
bartenders, mechanics and so on. So, you know, you've got people that are in a squeeze.
Well, let me ask you, this is a question, first question from a viewer, and you might have addressed some of this. What will happen to all the mortgage/credit card debt, student loan debt? Are we talking about debt forgiveness, or will be rolled into this new system? So a lot of people will have to start out in debt in the new system.
Well, the sensible thing to do is, let's put it this way. I wrote a book years ago called Babylon's Banksters.
Yes, you did.
And it was about the Babylonian financial system. And it was really kind of a two-track system, because they had two kinds of currency. And one kind of currency was a currency that was basically based upon the surplus of the state warehouse. In other words, it was debt-free money. And the other type of currency was that they would exchange their bills of credit and so on and monetize debt. Now, we have been living in this country since the rise of the Federal Reserve with a currency system that was, again, a two-track system. You had circulating silver certificates, gold certificates, and treasury notes, which were debt-free money. And then you had Federal Reserve notes. And those are now the only thing in circulation. So Americans have no idea of an economic system where the currency is not monetized debt. And we're now faced with, since the 2008 bailouts, we're now faced with derivatives on the books that are in excess. The last figure I saw was about $17 quadrillion. That's several times the gross domestic product of the entire planet.
Quadrillions.
Quadrillion.
What I saw was between 700 and 701.5. Well, 1.5 quadrillion.
Well, it could be even more,
right?
But my point is there's so much debt sloshing around in the system that there is quiet talk of, a jubilee, just a plain and simple debt forgiveness. But again, we have no experience of this in modern history. We have to go all the way back to ancient Sumer and Babylon, where we have these regular jubilees where all the debt is just simply canceled. But it's interesting that we're already hearing little whispers of this, in the sense that, they've decided to delay the income tax until July. They've decided perhaps to delay student loan interest payments, and so on and so forth, which is a partial measure. But it would be a way for them to beta test things on a small scale to see how that works.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think we're looking at, and I mentioned this to Catherine, she thinks that this is being used to drive a push to a cashless society, to digital currencies, which again, I do not think is in the cards, because so many people, I'm old fashioned. I've got to have that physical medium of exchange, be it dollar notes or whatever.
Right.
It's interesting that Utah is one of the states in the union that has created its own bullion depository, like Texas. But now Utah has come out with a little certificate called goldbacks, and they're electroplated with minute amounts of gold, and they're trying to introduce this as kind of a local currency. Well, it's very interesting that one of the places they decided to introduce this was Hong Kong, in the numismatic markets in Hong Kong. Wow. So you can go to Hong Kong and buy Utah goldbacks, on the coin collection markets in Hong Kong. So, that's another little signal to me that they're beta testing all sorts of stuff on a very small scale. But, where it's going to go, I don't know.
Well, we're running out on time, and I got the 3 points I wanted. You just kind of brought something up there, and we've talked about this even before this happened. Like normal, like whatever we call it, symmetrical war, just is bad PR. It just looks bad. It doesn't have to be, but we're just seeing more and more emergence of asymmetrical warfare, whether it's cyber or this kind of stuff. Do you think, not to get into who did this or whatever, but could you see this as a possible means of asymmetrical warfare?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. Just geopolitically, what we're watching happen is kind of breathtaking, because as a result of this, China is being increasingly geopolitically isolated. The talk of people about how China has handled this is very negative, and it's negative even in China.
The growing anti-Chinese sentiment. Almost after 9/11, I was living in Chicago, they were beating up Sikhs, thinking they were Muslims, and I'm seeing online now Japanese people are being beat up, Korean people are being beat up, thinking they're Chinese, which is just and so
which wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense to beat up Chinese people either.
Well, of course not.
No,
I'm just,
it's not their fault,
Right? I'm not advocating that.
And the other part of this that makes me think it's an op, absolutely, is shortly after this outbreak began, you had the arrest of Dr. Lieber, the chairman of the Harvard chemistry department, because of his involvement in Wuhan in creating, nanotechnology and linking it to viruses and so on and so forth. He had a direct tie to the Chinese university there in Wuhan, and he was arrested.
Yeah, all these stories, like you said, they're just sucking.
Something is afoot there, definitely.
Yeah,
but,
absolutely.
Well, weeks. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Pat.
I was just going to say that, we're seeing a lot of footage, troop movements in the United States, but I also got footage earlier today that there's a lot of troop movement, a lot of heavy machinery, military equipment being moved around Germany right now, and
Europe,
You know, that
oh, well,
that
just
makes
what
me
we need is for the Germans to be involved.
right. So I'm just a tad nervous that this is not just going on in our country. Obviously, people are moving equipment and getting people ready to do something. I don't know if that's to lock down their own citizens and keep things calm, or if that's potentially, in history, we know when there's financial issues, financial collapse, things of this magnitude, generally it's followed by a pretty major conflict.
Yeah, I've seen these troop movements too, and part of me tries to cling to the optimistic idea that, well, they're just positioning these assets in potential trouble spots to prevent looting. But what I've seen is massive amounts of tanks and so on, heavy equipment.
Tanks, yeah,
Right.
heavy stuff.
Yeah, tanks. So, again, you can perhaps explain this as heavy equipment's being returned from Europe or wherever. So,
Well, again, going
I
back
don't
to the
know what's
recipe of
going on
collapse, I
here.
don't know if you've heard, the Philadelphia Police Department says they're not going to arrest people. They're releasing prisoners. Montana, L.A., St. Louis, they're all releasing prisoners and telling also people on the beat, we're not going to arrest for this or this or this. Why would you say that publicly? I just wouldn't even know. But that's just another one of those spokes on the wheel that's making me thinking, man, they are really, this is a deliberate reset, collapse, and they're leaving no stone unturned.
Yeah. It to me looks like they have planned this out for this reset business. But what I don't think they expected, and again, I'm kind of mystified by this. I don't think they expected the Trump administration to respond as it did, nor to respond as quickly as it did. And it's been very interesting to watch the circus in these press conferences of who gets to talk.
Yeah.
Because for a while it was Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx. Well, it turns out it's coming out now that they have ties to this whole Ukrainian Burisma business, and they're, by the way, no longer talking. So whatever is going on here, it's a battle royale.
Yeah.
and I really do think that I to clarify where I'm coming from for people here, when Trump came down the escalator, there was no doubt in my mind, and I said so at the time, that he was a deep state candidate just as much as Hillary Clinton was, but that his backing was an entirely different faction of that deep state. So the way I look at it, let's recall that President Trump at one time in his life was very closely associated with the original swamp creature, as I like to call him, Roy Cohn. And, Roy Cohn was chief counsel to Senator McCarthy. He was part of that McCarthy-Kennedy Forrestal nexus, and here sits Donald Trump squat in the middle of of that nexus. So this is the way I look at it too, is that this whole business with Trump is a long-term manifestation of some real factional infighting that's been going on in this country since the end of World War II. And that's the other factor that in my opinion, you have to factor in all of this. There is a real struggle, a real tug of war going on behind who gets to be at the top when the music stops and you find your chair, so to speak.
And this goes,
good
Jeff,
analogy.
that goes, Jeff, with Jeff, that goes with your mafia family versus mafia family war that's been going on.
Bingo.
So
Bingo.
that falls right in line with what you've been saying all along.
For sure.
Bingo.
I mean, they're all kind of gangsters, but it's about fighting for territory, essentially, or it's a smaller scale analogy, but it's just global gangster stuff, really.
Right. That's precisely the way I viewed all of this myself. There's basically one country on the world scene that's not playing that game and is adamant in rejecting the tenets of globalism, and that's Russia. That's why they hate Putin so much. So it's going to be a very, very interesting
several weeks,
time.
months,
It could. Well, look, this coronavirus, I'm of the opinion, and I don't know about you guys, but I'm of the opinion that they have hyped this up so much that they cannot afford to keep this thing going for very long because people are going to get tired of it very quickly.
When the numbers just don't add up, right? Because it's not.
When the numbers just don't add up.
Even your lay person is seeing that, not just people who do shows like these or go deep down these rabbit holes, but like your normal person is literally like, this doesn't add up at all. But before we let you slide,
right.
Even after 2008, like you said, the quadrillions in derivatives, collateralized debt obligations, all of that stuff, weeks ago, before this had even popped off, you had a video about the imminent implosion of Deutsche Bank. So this was almost inevitable. Did they expedite it? Did this change the nature of that? Talk to me about that. Because the reset was almost
about Deutsche Bank for months.
It seemed like the reset was. It seemed like the reset was coming, but this expedited it.
I've got to tell you a story, and this is just again this story. The latest development I just found out a few minutes before we started recording. But a few days ago, someone sent me a story about the Kreditanstalt für Wiederaufbau Bank in Germany. This was a bank that was started after World War II to aid in the reconstruction of Germany. And the bank is therefore owned by the German government, although it is a normal credit and commerce type of bank, okay? But it's like the German government would own Commerzbank. In other words, this is a very large bank, but it is owned by the government. Well, the story came out that Kreditanstalt was going to float an issuance of about 600 billion euros to tide things over during this coronavirus story. And I thought, whoa, well, that's interesting, because what it effectively meant was that the German government was bypassing the European Central Bank and its own central bank, the Bundesbank, and was going to do this unilaterally. So in other words, to the EU, okay? And then just today, I get an email from Catherine Fitz, who was talking to the person that shared the story with me, and I passed it along to her, that she has been trying to find the story. The original person has been trying to find the story, and I've been trying to find the story, and it's completely scrubbed.
What?
Yes. Yeah. So whatever's going on in the banking system in Germany, it bodes ill for the European system. It bodes ill for Deutsche Bank, certainly. And
Brexit was a fatal blow to the European Union too, don't you think?
Brexit was a fatal blow, and I'll tell you why. And I'll tell you one of the things that I think it was all about. And again, this was an observation of Catherine Fitz, and I think she's absolutely 100% spot on. Because Britain being in the EU and, Germany basically driving the EU, one of the things I think it was all about was the British tax havens, the Jersey Islands, the Channel Islands, and all of those tax havens that Britain has had set up for years. And the last thing they wanted was for the EU and the Germans to get their hands on those things. So I think Brexit was in part about safeguarding all of those financial networks that the City of London had set up, during the course of the British Empire that are absolutely essential. If you want to launder lots of money, that's where you do it. And they did not want the EU getting their hands on that. I think that's part of what's hovering in the background with that whole story.
Wow. The rabbit hole goes deep, my friend.
Yeah,
very deep.
Yeah, when we go back to, and I wanted to jump in there and I didn't have a chance, but as far as being overblown, the coronavirus being overblown, we know that hospitals are being overloaded. We know that people are working overtime. We know that doctors and nurses are absolutely exhausted because there is a massive amount of people who are pouring into hospitals right now. But there has also been panic driven by the media, and now they're testing for it. And anyone with a cough, anyone feeling as sick as I did in January when my lungs were 2 bowls of soup, and I was having massive shaking and shivering and convulsing type symptoms. This is going to happen to hospitals. Most people are going, oh my God, this is the end. I've got to get to the hospital, and they're pouring in pretty much my entire family had the same thing, and my entire production crew, from the guys that I do shows with, a lot of guys got sick, and a lot of people started mentioning the other night when we were doing a broadcast, and I started talking about it. Literally, person after person after person said, "Oh my God, I had it too. I had it too. I had it too." This was very severe upper respiratory infection, and so I can understand why people, after all the hysteria that the media has driven, are rushing hospitals now.
Yes. Yeah, it is being driven by the media. And I'll tell you something else that is suspicious about all this. And again, Catherine and I discussed this at length. And we get the impression that the story is being used to cover a multitude of distinct medical phenomena. In other words, what we're looking at may not be just coronavirus, because there is that 5G connection. Italy has it, and that's where you have concentrations of it. China had it, and particularly in the Wuhan province. And again, that's what you're seeing there. So we think that there may be other mechanisms at work here that are being blamed on coronavirus.
Interesting. It's very interesting that you mentioned that, because and people can find it. I'll look and post a video of a very well-respected scientist who knows the history of pandemics and also knows the history of the release of new technologies, such as when satellites were launched, when the radar systems were put out. All of this stuff coincides, interestingly enough, the human population being bombarded with a new technology, and all of a sudden everybody getting sick. Now, look, people can say I'm crazy, but the timeline is correct. If you go back and look at all the years when this technology was released, it actually is correct.
I'll tell you,
AM
Pat,
radio, FM radio, all this stuff.
I'll tell you, Pat, you're onto something, and the reason I think that you are is if you go back a few years, remember the stories of birds in Tennessee or Idaho dropping out of the sky all at once in flight. And we were told that they showed symptoms of what appeared to be some sort of sudden onset bird flu.
Right.
Now, flus don't activate in less than an hour and wipe out,
kill a flock flying by, right?
Right. However, you do get electromagnetic signatures or electromagnetically induced things like this that will reflect or mimic the symptoms of flu-like things. So in other words, I do not discount, let's go back to the arrest of Charles Lieber. This was precisely the type of work that he was involved in. This was precisely the type of work that Jeffrey Epstein was trying to fund.
What?
Both
I didn't know that.
Right.
Both through Harvard and MIT. So in other words, again, we may be looking at something that is not, and this is why I bring it up, because the vector of this disease in terms of its transmission, particularly since the Chinese have obfuscated how this thing began, it is not clear. It is not clear. And you have these tests that are returning.
There is no patient zero. There is no patient zero,
so we don't know what the exact vector of this dang thing is.
There is an article from some Chinese periodical that said, and I don't know how the veracity of it, but it was like 5G begins in Wuhan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this could be in part a bioelectrical warfare type of scenario that we're in.
Well, I'm glad that an Oxford PhD didn't call me crazy and call me a tinfoil hat wearer when I brought.
Listen, I've been called far worse things than crazy, and I don't particularly care, but I tell people all the time, I'm a hack from South Dakota. All I do is what everybody else is doing. I'm reading the news and I'm trying to connect dots. That's all I'm doing. So, Oxford PhD has nothing to do with it. But, these stories have been out there.
Right.
And I think it's important for people to understand, particularly if they start digging into the biological and immunological effects of all of this electromagnetic soup we're in, particularly in terms of some of the research that was done during the Cold War in the Soviet Union with this type of stuff, which was absolutely some of the most advanced research that was being done at the time in this type of warfare. And, rest assured, the Russians didn't just quit doing it simply because the Soviet Union collapsed. That's absurd. So wow. I do think that we're looking at the possibility that this story is being used, so to speak, to cover a multitude of sins, because we're not given any clear picture of how this disease originated. Yeah. We're not even clear on how it spreads. And the other thing about it is it could be you could be having the disease and not be symptomatic. This is the other thing about it. It seems to affect certain target populations.
Genetic specific bioweapons.
Yeah, it's a
well, and that's why I also found odd with the incubation period. You could be asymptomatic for 2 weeks and be spreading it, but Trump and Pence are like, don't come in and get tested unless you're showing symptoms. Well, you could have been spreading it for the last 2 weeks, and then you go. I mean, that just seems kind of counterintuitive.
Well, it is and it isn't. You don't get tested for a disease unless you have it. In other words, if you suspect you have cancer, then your doctor will test you for it. You can't test everybody for everything.
Right.
This is the problem. But in this case, we could be looking at a disease that remains dormant until it gets into certain electromagnetic environmental conditions. It's like starting a turn-on virus now. Well,
and viruses are toxic cells excreting RNA and DNA with proteins tied to it, right? So, what's making the cell go haywire? That's where the 5G and the radar and all the other stuff come in.
Right.
That is like advanced, like you said, advanced bioweapon. And like I can't even think of. I mean, that's just insane. But like you said, they've been doing the research on it forever. Wow, Pat, I know
I've done several blogs on my website about this whole concept, and somebody sent me.
I'm just going to say this. I apologize, but for some, maybe it takes getting punched in the head for 20 years to figure this shit out, Jeff.
Well,
that's the recipe.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Well, yeah, it's again. I go back to my experience fighting the Battle of the Somme in the grocery store. That most of the people in the line that I was listening to were responding not out of fear, not out of panic, not out of response to the media. They were responding out of cynicism, to the whole thing and to their lack of trust in government institutions. I mean, this government has lied so many times over, ever since Kennedy was shot, and I'm of that generation. So, I have about just that much trust in anything.
We use the term frequently. It's mass Stockholm syndrome that we have going on. Yeah. Everyone's just, thankful that their abuser still beats the shit out of them. But I know Pat's got to run. And hey, listen, if you don't mind, sir, this is, we're going to be home for a while. So, a few weeks down the line, a month and a half down the line, I would love to get kind of a postmortem, even not a postmortem, just to update on what's going on, the direction of these things, because as you said, so many other things are going on beyond this or underneath this whole virus thing. So if you could come back soon, that would be great.
Sure.
If not, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, the man is a big brain. He's being a little modest on how big his brain is, but it's awesome. GizaDeathStar.com. Go on YouTube, check out Giza Death Star. Just volumes and volumes and volumes of information.
Say that slowly for everybody.
GizaDeathStar.com or Giza Death Star on YouTube. It's his YouTube channel. Dr. Farrell?
He's an Oxford PhD. He is not dumb.
He is. I can't thank you enough for your time, sir.
Thanks a lot, Jeffrey. Thanks for having me back on YouTube.
And if you could put in a good word with Catherine Austin Fitts, that'd be great. I've been a huge fan of her forever.
Well, send me an email, and I'll just pass it along to her.
Perfect. I appreciate that. All right, take care, guys. Peace and so much love. Stay tuned. There will always be more.